On Christmas, her drunk billionaire husband waved divorce papers in the air,
You'll remember
his
this
eyes
Christmas
cold and
forever.
cruel. But her three shocking surprises turned his perfect life into a nightmare. She leaned close and whispered, "You'll remember this Christmas forever." "Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter's family. May the Almighty wrap every woman in his mercy, blessing her with peace that softens pain, courage that never breaks, and a heart that glows even in the darkest night. May your laughter echo through your homes, your tears turn into triumphs, and your kindness return to you 1,000-fold. You are the soul of this world, the heartbeat of love, and the reason grace still lives among us. Our mission is mission 1,000 likes and comment on this story. Let's show the world that love, unity, and faith still win every battle. If your heart is true, like the video. If your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. Peter." Some loves burn so bright they leave nothing but ashes in their wake. And Demi Adams was about to discover that the man she gave her entire soul to was about to set everything on fire because he couldn't handle the heat. The celebration dinner was supposed to be theirs, an intimate moment to mark Gareth's first major contract, the breakthrough they'd been working toward together for 3 years. But his new business partner had insisted on hosting at his estate, had invited other colleagues, had turned their private victory into a networking opportunity Gareth couldn't refuse. Demi understood. She always understood. That's what you did when you loved someone. You adjusted your expectations and supported their climb, even when it meant standing in the background. She'd come straight from her hospital shift, exhausted but determined to be present for this moment that mattered so much to him. Her dress was simple, the best she could afford from the consignment shop, and she'd pulled her natural hair back because there hadn't been time for anything elaborate. The nausea that had been plaguing her for weeks hit again as she walked into the estate. That rolling queasiness she kept telling herself was just stress from working double shifts. Inside, the house blazed with wealth she'd only seen in magazines. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, artwork that probably cost more than she made in a year. The other guests moved through these spaces with easy confidence, women in designer dresses and men in tailored suits, all of them speaking a language of privilege Demi had never learned. She found Gareth near the bar, already several drinks in, his laughter too loud and his movements slightly unsteady. "There she is," he said when he saw her, and something in his tone made her stomach clench. "Everyone, this is Demi, the woman I've been living with. Not his girlfriend, not his partner, just someone who shared his space." But she smiled and greeted his colleagues, pretended not to notice the way they assessed her and found her wanting. The evening crawled forward through dinner, where she sat mostly silent, watching Gareth drink steadily and become someone she didn't quite recognize. His new business partner kept refilling his glass, encouraging stories about his journey from poverty to success. And Gareth leaned into the narrative with enthusiasm that felt desperate. "I came from nothing," he told the table, gesturing broadly with his wine glass. "My parents could barely keep the lights on. I swore I'd never live like that again, never be that person who couldn't afford basic dignity." Demi had heard this story before, but never told with such contempt for where he'd come from, never framed as something shameful rather than something he'd overcome. She reached for his hand under the table, a gentle reminder that she was here, that they were in this together. He pulled away, like her touch burned. After dinner, everyone moved to the drawing room for expensive liquor and cigars, a ritual that felt designed to exclude her. Demi stood near the window, feeling unmoored, wondering if she should just leave, when Gareth's business partner approached with practiced charm. "Gareth tells me you're a nurse," he said, making conversation that felt like obligation. "I am. At the county hospital. That's admirable. Hard work, I imagine. Not very glamorous, but important." The dismissal was subtle but clear. Before Demi could respond, Gareth appeared beside them, drunk enough that his careful control had dissolved into something raw and mean. "Glamorous? Nothing about Demi is glamorous," he said with a laugh that made her blood run cold. That's not her world. She's good at what she does, practical things, taking care of sick people. But this, he gestured at the room, the wealth, the elegance. This isn't her scene at all. Gareth, you're drunk, Demi said quietly, trying to give him an exit before he said something he'd regret. I'm honest. Finally honest? He turned to face her fully, and his green eyes were stranger's eyes, cold and accusing. Do you know what it's like? Working my way into these circles, trying to prove I belong here, and constantly having to explain you. Having to make excuses for why my girlfriend doesn't know which fork to use, why she talks about her shifts at the county hospital like anyone here cares about poor people's medical problems. The room had gone quiet, all attention focused on their conversation. Demi felt her face burning, but kept her voice steady. Let's talk about this at home. You're upset and drunk, and you're going to regret this in the morning. The only thing I regret is wasting 3 years pretending we made sense together. The words came out slurred, but clear enough to devastate. You were fine when I had nothing. Hell, you were perfect for that version of me, working class and comfortable with struggle. But I'm not that person anymore, Demi. I've moved past all that, and you're still stuck exactly where you've always been. I supported you, she said, her voice breaking despite her best efforts. I worked 2 jobs so you could focus on building your future. I believed in you when no one else did, and I'm grateful for that, I really am. But gratitude isn't the same as love, and I don't love you anymore. I haven't for months. I've just been too much of a coward to say it. He drained his glass and set it down with enough force that the sound echoed. I met someone else, someone who actually belongs in my life now. Her name is Hadley. She's everything you're not, and we're together officially. I was going to tell you tomorrow, but why wait? You should know the truth. Demi couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she was hearing. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not like this, not from the man who'd whispered promises about their future just weeks ago. You're humiliating me in front of strangers, she managed to say. Whatever you're feeling, whatever you think you want, this isn't how you treat someone you spent 3 years with. I'm setting us both free, he shot back. You want to keep working at that hospital, living small, that's fine. That's who you are, but it's not who I am anymore, and I can't keep pretending otherwise. I need someone who matches where I'm going, not where I've been. Someone in the crowd murmured disapproval, but no one intervened. They watched like this was entertainment, a spectacle they'd gossip about later. Demi looked at Gareth, really looked at him, and saw someone she didn't recognize. The alcohol had stripped away his careful facade, revealed something ugly underneath. But she realized this ugliness had probably always been there, just hidden better when he needed her. I'm pregnant, she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. She hadn't meant to tell him like this, hadn't even taken the test yet, but her body knew and she needed him to know, needed something to reach through his drunken cruelty. Gareth stared at her for a long moment, and she saw confusion flicker across his face, then calculation, then something that looked almost like panic before his expression hardened again. No, you're not, he said flatly. You're just saying that to make me stay. That's manipulative, Demi. That's beneath even you. I'm not lying. I've been feeling sick for weeks. I was going to take a test tomorrow. I was going to tell you when we were alone. Convenient timing, he laughed bitterly. The moment I tell you it's over, suddenly you're pregnant. Even if it's true, that doesn't change anything. I don't want this life with you. I don't want any life with you. We're done. And if you are pregnant, we'll figure that out with lawyers. Not by forcing me to stay in something I don't want. The dismissal was so complete, so final, that Demi couldn't even find words to respond. She just turned and walked out, through the drawing room full of strangers who'd witnessed her destruction, through the marble foyer, out into the cold night that felt warmer than the space she'd just left. She drove home on autopilot, her mind blank with shock, and found their apartment already half empty. He must have had movers come while she was at work. Must have been planning this for days or weeks. Had just been waiting for liquid courage to detonate everything. A check sat on the kitchen counter with a note in his handwriting, the letters slightly unsteady, like he'd been drinking when he wrote it too. 3 months' rent. Car is paid off. We're settled. I'll send someone for the rest of my things. Don't contact me. My lawyer will reach out if you're actually pregnant. Otherwise, let's just move on. Demi sat on the floor, holding that note, rereading it until the words stopped making sense, and finally let herself cry. Not the quiet tears of someone trying to maintain dignity, but the ugly sobbing of someone whose world had just collapsed. She'd given him everything, had believed in their future, and he'd thrown her away the moment he didn't need her anymore. The cruelty wasn't calculated like a villain's plan. It was worse somehow. The spontaneous cruelty of someone who'd been drinking enough to stop pretending to be decent. She pulled herself together enough to walk to the bathroom and take the pregnancy test she'd been avoiding. The wait felt eternal, and when 2 lines appeared, she took another. Then another, all positive, all confirming that the worst night of her life had left her with something permanent, a piece of the man who'd just destroyed her growing inside her body. Demi sat on the cold bathroom tile, surrounded by positive pregnancy tests, and made her decision. She would tell no one about this, would handle it alone, would raise this child without the father who'd made it clear he didn't want any life that included her. He'd called her a liar when she'd told him, had accused her of manipulation, had proven in the ugliest way possible that he wasn't someone who deserved to know his child. "He doesn't deserve you," she whispered to her still flat stomach. "He threw us away without even believing you were real, so we're going to survive without him. I'm going to make sure you have everything you need, and he'll never know you exist. That's my promise to you." The grief came in waves after that. Grief for the relationship she'd thought they had, for the future she'd imagined, for the partnership she'd believed was strong enough to weather anything. But underneath the grief was something harder. A core of anger and determination that would carry her through what came next. Gareth Foster had discarded her like she was nothing, and she was going to prove him wrong about everything. She would raise this child alone, would build a life that didn't need him, would become someone so strong that his rejection would look like the worst mistake of his life. Chapter 2. The Girl Who Became Her Reason. The contractions started during a late afternoon rainstorm, sharp and insistent, announcing that ready or not, everything was about to change. Demi had spent months preparing for this moment, attending classes alone, reading every book the library offered, practicing breathing techniques in the middle of the night when fear made sleep impossible. But nothing prepared her for the reality of labor, the way pain reshaped time into something elastic and cruel. She drove herself to the hospital, gripping the steering wheel through contractions that threatened to steal her breath. The intake nurse looked at her with concern when she arrived alone, asked twice if there was someone they could call. Demi shook her head, signed papers with trembling hands, and was shown to a delivery room that smelled like antiseptic and fear. The walls were painted a soothing blue that did nothing to soothe the terror clawing at her chest. Hours bled into each other. The pain escalated beyond anything she'd imagined, beyond the sanitized descriptions from her birthing class, beyond the stories she'd heard from other mothers. She screamed until her voice gave out, begged for relief that came too slowly, and somewhere in the haze of agony she thought about calling Gareth. His number was still in her phone, unchanged because she couldn't quite bring herself to delete it. She could tell him he had a daughter on the way, could hear his voice one more time, could give him the chance to be present for this. But then she remembered his face in that drawing room, the casual cruelty of his drunken announcement, the way he'd called her a liar when she told him she was pregnant. She remembered his note calling their relationship settled, like love was a debt that could be paid off with 3 months' rent. The anger that surged through her was almost as powerful as the contractions, and she used it, channeled it into pushing through pain that felt like it would break her in half. "You're doing beautifully," the nurse said, lying with practiced kindness. "Just a little more." Demi pushed until she thought she'd shatter, until the world narrowed to nothing but the need to bring this child into existence. And then, in a rush of relief so profound it felt like resurrection, She heard the cry that meant everything had changed forever. "It's a girl," as someone announced, and Demi sobbed as they placed a tiny, perfect human on her chest. The baby was still covered in the evidence of birth, wailing with impressive volume, and she was the most beautiful thing Demi had ever seen. Dark hair plastered to a small skull, skin that would deepen to brown like Demi's own, and when those eyes opened briefly, they were startling green. Gareth's eyes looking at her from an innocent face that knew nothing about cruelty or abandonment. "Hi, baby girl," Demi whispered through tears that wouldn't stop. "I'm your mama. I'm right here. I'm always going to be right here." She named her Temperance Lily, speaking the words to the nurse, who filled out the birth certificate with efficient strokes. The space for father's name remained blank, just like Demi had planned. She watched the nurse write unknown in that empty line and felt satisfaction mixed with sadness. This perfect child would never have a father's name on her official records, would grow up with that blank space as evidence of rejection she was too young to understand. The hospital kept them for observation because there had been complications, blood loss that concerned the doctors, and Demi was grateful for the delay. Going home to an empty apartment felt impossible while her body still ached from the trauma of birth. The nurses brought Temperance for feeding, showed Demi how to latch her properly, offered advice about everything from diaper changes to warning signs of illness. None of them asked about the father again after that first question in admissions, and Demi was grateful for the mercy of their silence. On the second night, while Temperance slept in the bassinet beside her bed, Demi pulled out her phone and searched for Gareth online. She'd avoided looking for months, afraid of what she might find. But now she needed to know. His profile loaded immediately, public and polished. Photos showed him at various events, always impeccably dressed, always with Hadley draped on his arm, like an expensive accessory. The engagement had been announced formally, with pictures in society pages Demi had never read before. They looked perfect together, both beautiful and privileged, matched in ways Demi never could have been. The wedding was planned for spring. Looking at the announcement felt like pressing on a bruise, painful but somehow necessary. Gareth's smile in the photos looked genuine, or maybe she'd just forgotten what genuine looked like on him. Had he ever loved her, or had she been convenient from the beginning? Someone to support him until he found someone better. The questions hurt worse than the contractions had because they had no clear answer. No relief coming after enough pushing. She deleted his contact information that night, blocked his number, removed every digital trace of him from her phone. Then she looked at her daughter sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the complicated world she'd been born into, and Demi made her choice. This baby would know stability and love. She would never wonder if her mother wanted her, never feel like a burden or mistake, and she would never know the man who'd rejected them both without even knowing she existed. The first weeks at home were survival, nothing more elegant than that. Temperance cried constantly, slept in unpredictable increments, and needed everything with an urgency that left no room for Demi's own needs. She learned to eat standing up while bouncing a fussy infant, to shower in 5-minute increments when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm basic hygiene, to sleep whenever Temperance slept because nighttime had become meaningless. Money evaporated faster than she'd anticipated, despite months of careful planning. Formula, diapers, clothes that Temperance outgrew almost immediately, medical appointments that added up even with insurance. Demi's savings account dwindled towards zero while she tried to figure out how to work from home doing medical billing, transcribing doctor's notes during stolen moments when the baby napped. It wasn't enough, would never be enough, but it was what she could manage alone. The apartment felt simultaneously too small and too empty. Temperance's crying echoed off walls that held no other sound, no partnership, no one to share the burden of constant caretaking. Demi found herself talking to the baby constantly, narrating everything because silence felt dangerous, like it might swallow them both. She described what she was cooking, explained the plot of television shows that played in the background, sang songs she half remembered from childhood, we're okay," she told Temperance during a particularly difficult night when nothing would soothe the crying. "We're going to be okay. I promise you that. I know this is hard, but we're strong. You and me, we're stronger than anything." She almost believed it. Watching Temperance grow became both joy and heartbreak. Every milestone, every smile, every small achievement was tainted by the knowledge that Gareth was missing this. He didn't know his daughter had his eyes, his expressions, the same stubborn set to her jaw when she was frustrated. He would never know that she smiled in her sleep, that she loved being sung to, that she grabbed onto Demi's finger with surprising strength and held on like she understood, on some instinctive level, that they only had each other. Demi took hundreds of photos, documenting everything because someday Temperance would ask about her early years, and Demi wanted proof of how loved she'd been. But there would be no pictures of a father holding his newborn, no images of family, complete and happy. Just Demi and Temperance, two against the world, making it work through sheer determination. On particularly difficult days, when money was tight and exhaustion made everything feel impossible, Demi would look at Temperance and wonder if she'd made the right choice. Should she have told Gareth? Did he deserve to know about his child regardless of how he'd treated her? But then she'd remember his voice in that drawing room, calling her a liar when she told him she was pregnant, and she knew. He'd given up any right to this perfect person the moment he chose cruelty over kindness. Temperance deserved better than a father who needed to be guilted into caring. She deserved someone who would choose her every single day, who would sacrifice and struggle and show up no matter how hard it got. And if that person could only be Demi, then Demi would be enough. She had to be. As Temperance's first winter gave way to spring, Demi found a rhythm that felt sustainable if not easy. She worked during naps and after bedtime, picked up additional billing contracts that let her save tiny amounts. She learned to accept help from a neighbor who occasionally watched Temperance so Demi could shower or sleep. She joined a mother's group at the community center and found other women navigating parenthood alone. Their stories all different, but the exhaustion universal. But every night, after Temperance was finally asleep, Demi would stand in the doorway of the nursery watching her daughter breathe, and she'd think about Gareth. Not with longing anymore, but with something harder. Anger that he got to move through the world unburdened while she carried everything. Satisfaction that he would never know this joy, never experience this love. And underneath it all, buried deep, the faint, terrible hope that someday he would find out what he'd missed, and it would destroy him the way he'd once destroyed her. Chapter 3. The Empire She Built from Ashes. Demi learned to survive on determination and coffee that had long since gone cold. Stolen sips between patient charts and bedtime stories. She'd gone back to school through a combination of student loans, grants, and the kind of stubborn refusal to quit that came from knowing failure meant her daughter going without. The online program let her attend lectures after Temperance fell asleep, write papers while her daughter napped, study medical terminology in the stolen minutes before exhaustion dragged her under. The transformation happened slowly, built from thousands of small choices that added up to something significant. She stopped being the soft woman who'd loved Gareth Foster and became someone harder, someone who asked for what she deserved instead of accepting whatever scraps life offered. She negotiated better rates for her medical billing work, demanded payment on time, refused clients who tried to take advantage of her flexibility. She learned to say no without apology, to protect her boundaries with the same fierce energy she protected her daughter. Temperance grew into a curious, bright child who asked endless questions about everything she saw. Why was the sky blue? Where did rain come from? What made flowers grow? Demi answered every question with patience that surprised her, grateful for the distraction from her own exhaustion. Her daughter's voice became the soundtrack to her life, constant chatter that filled the apartment with noise that felt less lonely than silence. Preschool opened up new challenges. The other mothers looked at Demi differently, single and young, and obviously struggling in ways their comfortable lives hadn't required. They formed their groups without her, exchanged playdates and coffee dates that never included an invitation for Temperance. Demi told herself it didn't matter, that she didn't need their friendship. But watching her daughter play alone while other children ran in packs hurt in ways she wasn't prepared for. "Mama, why don't I have a daddy?" Temperance asked one evening while Demi braided her dark curls, getting her ready for bed. The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through everything Demi had carefully constructed. "Some families look different, baby. We have each other, and that's what matters." The answer felt inadequate even as she spoke it, but what else could she say? "Your father called me a liar and threw me away, so I made sure he'd never know you existed. No child needed that burden, but everyone else has a daddy. Riley has a daddy who picks her up from school. Jordan's daddy brings cupcakes on birthdays." Temperance's green eyes, so painfully like Gareth's, looked up at Demi with confusion that broke her heart. "Did my daddy not want me?" "No, sweetheart, no." Demi pulled her daughter close, breathing in the clean scent of her shampoo. "Your daddy doesn't know about you. He went away before you were born, before I knew you were coming. And I decided we didn't need him because we're so strong together. You understand?" Temperance nodded against her chest, but Demi could feel the confusion radiating from her small body. "How did you explain adult failures to a child who only understood love as unconditional? How did you tell your daughter that her father had chosen not knowing her over the possibility of staying?" The questions came more frequently as Temperance grew. Where did he go? Why didn't he come back? Would he like her if he met her? Each one was a knife between Demi's ribs, guilt mixing with anger in toxic combination. She'd made this choice, had weaponized Gareth's ignorance as punishment, but Temperance was collateral damage to a war she hadn't chosen to fight. Graduation from her program felt like emerging from underwater, gasping and disoriented. Demi walked across a stage in borrowed regalia with Temperance in the audience, her daughter's applause the loudest sound in the auditorium. She'd done it, had earned credentials that would let her work as a physician assistant, would give them security beyond what she'd imagined possible. The job offers came quickly, medical practices desperate for qualified staff willing to work hard. She chose a position at a family practice in a better neighborhood, close to a school district with a reputation that made other mothers fight for enrollment. The salary felt surreal after years of scraping by, enough that she could afford a small house with a yard where Temperance could play. The transformation from struggling single mother to successful professional happened so fast it left Demi dizzy, but she grabbed onto stability with both hands and refused to let go. The house was modest, nothing compared to the estate where Gareth had destroyed her, but it was theirs. Demi walked through empty rooms and saw possibility instead of lack. She painted Temperance's bedroom a soft lavender, hung curtains they picked out together, assembled furniture using instructions she puzzled through alone. Every piece felt like victory, evidence that they didn't need anyone else to build a home. Temperance bloomed in the new environment, made friends at her school, brought home artwork that Demi hung on the refrigerator with pride. Watching her daughter thrive felt like justification for every choice Demi had made, including the choice to keep Gareth locked out of their lives. They were fine without him. Better than fine. They were building something good from the wreckage he'd left behind. But late at night, after Temperance was asleep, Demi would sometimes pull out her phone and search for Gareth Foster's name. It was self-destructive, picking at a wound that refused to fully heal, but she couldn't quite stop herself. His life played out in glossy photographs online, success building on success in ways that made her jaw clench. He'd married Hadley Whitmore in a ceremony that looked like it belonged in a magazine, all white flowers and expensive smiles. They lived in a penthouse he'd designed himself, attended charity events, traveled to places Demi had only seen in travel shows. He looked happy in the photos, or at least he looked successful, which maybe for him was the same thing. There were no children from his marriage, no announcement of pregnancy, no images of him cradling an infant the way he'd never cradled Temperance. Demi wondered if Hadley wanted children, if they'd tried and failed, if maybe cosmic justice meant Gareth would never know the one child he'd actually fathered. The bitterness surprised her sometimes, the way it could still rise up sharp and choking after all this time. She'd built a good life, had transformed herself into someone strong and capable, but seeing him succeed without consequence made the old anger fresh. He got to discard her and move on like she'd never mattered, while she carried the weight of his rejection every single day in the form of a daughter who looked just like him. "I hope you're miserable," she whispered to his image on her phone screen, knowing it was petty and not caring. "I hope that perfect life feels as empty as it looks. I hope you wake up someday and realize what you lost." Temperance's voice called from her bedroom, breaking into Demi's spiral. "Mama, I had a bad dream." Demi closed the browser, deleted her search history like that could erase the impulse to look, and went to comfort her daughter. She climbed into Temperance's small bed, let her curl against her side, and stroked her dark curls until her breathing evened out into sleep. This was what mattered. This warmth, this trust, this small human who depended on her for everything. As she lay there in the dark, listening to her daughter breathe, Demi made a promise to herself. She would stop looking for Gareth online, would stop checking if he'd achieved new success or experienced failure. He didn't deserve space in her thoughts, didn't earn the energy she wasted being angry. He'd made his choice, and she'd made hers, and they were living in completely separate worlds that would never intersect again. But fate, it turned out, had other plans, and those plans would detonate the careful walls Demi had built around herself and her daughter, leaving them exposed to the very man she'd spent years protecting them from. The collision was coming whether she wanted it or not, and it would change everything they'd built from the ashes of his destruction. Chapter 4. The collision nobody saw coming. The coffee shop was Temperance's favorite, mostly because they made hot chocolate with whipped cream shaped like a mountain and let kids choose their own sprinkles. It had become their Sunday morning ritual, a small indulgence before grocery shopping and laundry and all the mundane tasks that filled their weekends. Demi sat at a corner table, watching her daughter carefully distribute rainbow sprinkles across her whipped cream, with the serious concentration of someone performing surgery. "Mama, you're not drinking yours," Temperance observed, looking up with those green eyes that still sometimes caught Demi off guard, with their resemblance to someone she tried not to think about. "Just enjoying watching you, baby. You're very focused on those sprinkles. They have to be even. If one side has more than the other, it tastes different." Demi smiled at the logic only a 5-year-old could produce and lifted her own coffee, letting the warmth seep into her hands. Early autumn weekends like this felt precious, stolen moments before the week's chaos resumed, before work schedules and school pickups and the endless juggling of single parenthood. She'd learned to treasure these pockets of peace. The door chimed as someone entered, bringing in cool air and the sound of street traffic. Demi glanced up automatically, the way you do in public spaces, and felt the world tilt sideways. Gareth Foster stood at the counter ordering something, his back to her, but she would recognize that posture anywhere, the way he stood with confidence that bordered on arrogance. 6 years hadn't changed him as much as she'd hoped, hadn't added the weight of consequence she'd wanted to see sitting on his shoulders. Her first instinct was to grab Temperance and leave immediately, to avoid whatever this collision would bring. But moving would draw attention, and besides, maybe he wouldn't see her. Maybe he'd get his coffee and leave, and she could preserve the careful separation she'd built between their worlds. She turned slightly in her chair, angling away from the counter, and focused on Temperance with forced attention. "Tell me about what you want to do at school this week," she said, keeping her voice low and steady. Temperance launched into an explanation about an art project involving leaves and glue, her hands gesturing enthusiastically enough to threaten the structural integrity of her whipped cream mountain. Demi nodded and made appropriate sounds of interest, while her peripheral vision tracked Gareth collecting his order and turning toward the seating area. She saw the moment he recognized her. His stride faltered, coffee cup frozen halfway to his mouth, and his expression shifted through confusion to recognition, to something she couldn't quite identify. She looked away quickly, pulling Temperance's attention back to her hot chocolate, willing herself invisible. But it was too late. He was walking toward their table with purpose that made her chest tighten. "Demi?" His voice was exactly the same. That particular tone that used to make her feel seen and now just made her feel exposed. She took a breath that didn't quite fill her lungs and looked up with an expression she'd been practicing in mirrors for years, professionally neutral and completely blank. "Gareth. Hi." He stood awkwardly beside their table, clearly unsure whether he was welcome to sit or even to continue this conversation. His eyes kept darting to Temperance with curiosity that made Demi's protective instincts flare. "I didn't expect to see you. I mean, I live nearby now. I've been coming here for weeks. I just never thought you'd—" He trailed off, apparently realizing how that sounded. "We come here sometimes on weekends," Demi said, keeping her tone carefully casual despite the way her heart was hammering. "It's Temperance's favorite place for hot chocolate." At the sound of her name, Temperance looked up from her sprinkle arrangement and studied Gareth with the frank curiosity of childhood. "Hi, I'm 5. Are you my mama's friend?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Demi watched Gareth's face as he processed the age, the timeline, the math that was probably already happening in his head. She needed to end this encounter before it went any further. "An old friend from a long time ago," Demi said quickly. "Someone I used to know before you were born." "Oh." Temperance accepted this explanation with the easy flexibility of children and went back to her hot chocolate. "Mama, can I have a cookie too?" "Uti, after you finish that," Demi promised, then looked back at Gareth with an expression that clearly said this conversation was over. "It was nice seeing you again. Enjoy your coffee." He didn't move, just stood there, staring at Temperance like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "How old did she say she was?" 5. "And we really need to get going, grocery shopping to do." "She's 5 years old." He repeated it slowly, and Demi could see the wheels turning, see him counting backwards. "She was born? That's not really your concern." Demi stood, gathering her purse and reaching for Temperance's jacket. "Come on, baby, we need to go." "But I'm not finished." Temperance protested, pointing at her half-full cup. "We'll take it with us." Demi was already helping her into her coat, moving with efficiency born from 6 years of solo parenting. She could feel Gareth's attention boring into her back, feel the questions building. "Demi, wait, please." His voice was urgent enough that several other customers glanced over. "Is she? I mean, the timing. She's 5, which means she was born about 6 months after We're leaving," Demi said firmly, taking Temperance's hand and moving toward the door. But Gareth followed, his coffee abandoned on someone else's table. "Just tell me, please, is she mine?" The question came out desperate, loud enough that people were definitely staring now. Demi turned on him with fury she'd been holding back for 6 years. "You don't get to ask me that. You don't get to show up after all this time and demand answers about my daughter. Your daughter who looks exactly like me," he said, and his voice cracked slightly. "She has my eyes, Demi. She has my face. I remember that night at the dinner party. You told me you were pregnant and I called you a liar. I was drunk and cruel and I said terrible things, but was it true? Were you actually pregnant?" Temperance was looking between them with confusion, starting to shade toward fear. Demi knelt beside her, blocking Gareth from view. "Baby, go wait by the door for just 1 minute, okay? I need to talk to this person and then we'll go." "Are you mad at him?" Temperance asked, perceptive as always. "Just some grown-up stuff." "1 minute, I promise." Once Temperance was out of earshot, Demi stood and faced Gareth with cold rage. "You called me a liar when I told you I was pregnant. You said I was being manipulative, trying to trap you. You told me to have my lawyer contact yours if it was even true. So yes, it was true, and I had my daughter, and I raised her alone because you made it very clear you didn't want any life that included me. I was drunk, he said, his face pale. I was scared and drunk, and I said things I didn't mean. If I'd known you were really pregnant, if I'd known there was actually a baby, then what? You would have done the right thing, married me out of obligation, resented us both for ruining your perfect new life. Demi stepped closer, lowering her voice to something dangerous. I made the choice to keep you out of our lives because you proved you weren't safe. You destroyed me in front of strangers, called me nothing, threw me away like garbage. I wasn't letting you do that to my daughter. Our daughter, he corrected, and something in his voice broke. No, my daughter. I carried her alone, gave birth alone, raised her alone while you were off living your perfect life. You have no claim to her. I'm her father. You're a sperm donor who happened to be present at conception. A father is someone who shows up, who sacrifices, who puts his child's needs first. You've never done any of those things. Gareth looked like she'd struck him, and maybe she had with words instead of hands. Let me meet her properly. Let me be part of her life. I'll do whatever you want, follow whatever rules you set, but please don't keep me from my daughter. The daughter you called me a liar about. The one you said I was making up to trap you. Demi's laugh was sharp and bitter. You had your chance 6 years ago to be decent, to believe me, to support me. You chose differently. Those choices have consequences. She turned away before he could respond and went to Temperance, taking her hand and walking out of the coffee shop without looking back. Behind her, she could hear Gareth calling her name, but she didn't stop, didn't acknowledge him. Just got Temperance into her car and drove away while her hands shook on the steering wheel. Mama, who was that man? Temperance asked from her booster seat. Why were you talking angry? Just someone from a long time ago, baby. Nobody important. But as Demi drove toward the grocery store with her daughter chattering in the back seat, she knew that was a lie. Gareth Foster had just crashed back into their carefully constructed world, and the impact was going to create ripples neither of them could control. He'd seen Temperance, had recognized himself in her face, and there was no way he was going to just walk away from that knowledge. She'd spent 6 years protecting her daughter from the man who destroyed her. And now that protection was crumbling because of a random encounter at a coffee shop on an ordinary Sunday morning, the universe had a cruel sense of timing, throwing them together just when Demi had finally built a life that felt stable. Now everything was about to change, whether she wanted it to or not. And all she could do was hold tight to her daughter and prepare for the storm she could feel building on the horizon. Chapter 5. The truth begins to surface. Gareth couldn't stop thinking about Demi's daughter. The information nagged at him through sleepless nights in his hotel room, through meetings where he stared at blueprints without seeing them, through conversations with lawyers about his disintegrating marriage. She'd said her daughter attended this school, which meant the child lived nearby, which meant Demi had been 30 miles away, for who knew how long, while he'd been moving through his empty life completely unaware. He told himself it was just curiosity, just wanting to understand what had become of the woman he'd destroyed. But late one night, alone with whiskey he barely tasted, he did the math he'd been avoiding. The school was for young children, elementary level. If Demi's daughter attended there, she couldn't be more than a handful of years old, which meant she'd been born sometime after he'd left Demi standing in that drawing room with her world collapsing around her. The possibility hit him like a punch to the chest, stealing air and clarity simultaneously. What if Demi had been pregnant when he left? What if that daughter she'd mentioned so casually carried his blood, his features, his genetic legacy? The thought made his hands shake badly enough that he set down the whiskey glass before he dropped it. He hired someone to find out more, just basic information, nothing invasive. He told himself he just needed to know, needed to understand what he might have missed. The report came back within days, stark facts that rearranged his understanding of the last 6 years. Demi Adams had a daughter named Temperance Lily Adams, born approximately 8 months after the night Gareth had ended their relationship. Father listed as unknown on the birth certificate. No record of Demi having been in another relationship during that time frame. Gareth read the report 3 times before the words fully penetrated. Then he walked to his hotel bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left, the physical reaction to information his brain couldn't process. He had a daughter, a little girl he'd never met, never held, never even known existed. Demi had been carrying his child when he'd called her nothing, when he'd kissed Hadley in front of everyone, when he'd left that check on the counter like their entire relationship could be reduced to a financial settlement. The guilt was a living thing, clawing at his insides with teeth sharp enough to draw blood. He'd destroyed a pregnant woman without knowing she was pregnant, but did that matter? He'd been cruel regardless. He'd humiliated her, discarded her, proved himself capable of casual devastation. And she'd responded by erasing him completely, raising his daughter alone rather than let him be part of their lives. Could he even blame her for that? If their positions were reversed, would he have told her? He looked at the single photo the investigator had included, taken from a distance at the school playground. A small girl with dark curly hair and a smile that looked familiar in ways that hurt to recognize. She wore bright pink and ran with the particular abandon of childhood, and she was his daughter, his blood, his legacy that he'd been shut out from because he'd proven himself unworthy of knowing her. Gareth started driving by the school during pickup times, parking far enough away that he couldn't be obvious, but close enough to see. He told himself he just needed to confirm what he already knew, just needed to see her clearly enough to be certain. But the first time he got a good look at Temperance's face, every doubt evaporated. She had his eyes, the exact shade of green he saw in his own mirror. She had his hair texture, those dark curls that resisted taming. She had his stubborn chin and his expressive eyebrows, and his way of tilting her head when she was thinking. She was also absolutely, unmistakably Demi's daughter. Her skin was Demi's warm brown, her smile was Demi's gentle curve, her movements had Demi's grace. She was this perfect synthesis of both of them. This human proof that they'd created something beautiful together, even if everything else between them had turned ugly. He watched her laugh with other children, watched her run to Demi when school let out, watched his daughter throw her arms around a mother who'd raised her completely alone. The love between them was obvious, even from a distance, the way Temperance's face lit up when she saw Demi, the way Demi knelt to listen to whatever story her daughter was telling with animated gestures. They were a unit, complete and functional, and he was an outsider looking in at a life that should have included him. The third time he sat in his car watching them, Demi noticed. Of course she did. She'd probably been hyper-aware of threats since the day he'd left her, probably watched for danger with the vigilance of someone who'd learned people could hurt you without warning. She handed Temperance off to another parent, said something that made her daughter skip toward another car, then marched toward Gareth with fury radiating from every line of her body. He got out of the car before she reached him, hands raised in a gesture of surrender that felt pathetic. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Her voice was low and vicious, controlled despite obvious rage. "Why are you lurking outside my daughter's school?" I needed to see her. The words came out broken, inadequate. I needed to know. Know what? But her eyes flickered with something that might have been resignation, like she'd known this confrontation was inevitable. "Is she mine?" he asked directly, past caring about subtlety. "Is Temperance my daughter?" Demi's expression went cold in a way that was somehow worse than her anger. "What daughter? I don't know what you're talking about. Don't do this, please." He was begging and didn't care. "I saw her. She has my eyes, Demi. She has my face. I did the math. She was born 8 months after I left you, which means you were pregnant that night at the dinner party. You were carrying my child when I humiliated you in front of all those people." "You don't have a child," Demi said flatly. "You have nothing. No rights, no claims, no connection to my daughter whatsoever. But I'm her father. No, you're a sperm donor who happened to be present at conception. A father is someone who shows up, who sacrifices, who puts his child's needs before his own ego. You're not capable of that. You proved it when you threw away the woman carrying your child because she embarrassed you. The words landed like physical blows. I didn't know. God, Demi, I didn't know you were pregnant. If I'd known, I never would have. Wouldn't have what? Destroyed me in front of strangers. Paid me off like a debt. Married someone else while your child grew inside me. She laughed bitterly. You're lying to yourself if you think knowing would have changed anything. You didn't love me enough to treat me like a human being when you thought we were just a couple. Why would a pregnancy suddenly make you decent? Because it would have, he insisted desperately. I would have stepped up. I would have done the right thing. The right thing would have been not calling me nothing. The right thing would have been breaking up with me in private instead of making it a public spectacle. The right thing would have been acknowledging that I'd supported you for 3 years and deserved basic respect. You don't get credit for hypothetically doing better when you actually did your worst. I'm sorry, he said, and tears he didn't know were possible burned in his eyes. I'm so sorry for all of it. I was young and terrified, and I made the worst mistake of my life. But please, please don't punish me by keeping my daughter from me. Let me know her. Let me be part of her life. I'm begging you. You think this is about punishing you. Demi's voice rose slightly before she caught herself, glancing toward where Temperance played oblivious to the adult drama unfolding nearby. This is about protecting her. My daughter has never known anything but love and security. She's never been made to feel like she wasn't enough, never been discarded, never been called nothing. I'm not letting you teach her those lessons. I wouldn't hurt her. I would never hurt her. You hurt me, Demi said simply, and she's part of me, the part I've protected every single day since she was born. If you think I'm letting you near her after what you're capable of, you're more delusional than I thought. She turned to walk away, and panic surged through him. I'll file for paternity testing. I have rights. I'm her biological father, and the law gives me standing to petition for visitation. Demi turned back slowly, her expression arctic. You're threatening me? You're actually standing here threatening me with courts and lawyers. I'm not threatening. I'm just saying that if you won't let me see her voluntarily, I'll do what I have to do legally. She's my daughter too. She's nothing to you, Demi shot back. She's a stranger you've watched from a car, like some kind of stalker. You want to traumatize her by forcing yourself into her life through courts? Go ahead. Let her see exactly what kind of man her father is. Let her learn that men take what they want, regardless of who gets hurt. That sounds like great parenting. She walked away before he could respond, moving quickly toward where Temperance waited. He watched her scoop their daughter into her arms, watched them drive away, and understood with perfect clarity that he'd lost them both. Not through circumstance or bad timing, but through his own choices. He'd destroyed the woman he loved and lost the daughter he'd never known existed. And the consequences of one night's cruelty were going to echo through the rest of his life. He sat in his car until the school parking lot emptied, until security asked him to leave, until darkness fell and he had to drive back to his hotel room that felt more like a cell. That night, he did something he hadn't done in years. He cried, not the careful, controlled tears of adult disappointment, but the ugly sobbing of someone whose entire world had just revealed itself as empty. He had everything he'd thought he wanted, and nothing that actually mattered. And the daughter who might have been his redemption was being raised to see him as the villain, because that's what he was, the villain in their story, and no amount of regret could rewrite that truth. Chapter 6. The Fortress She Must Defend. The letter arrived on expensive paper, with a law firm's embossed letterhead, delivered by courier like something that mattered instead of something that threatened to dismantle everything Demi had built. She stared at the envelope for 3 days before opening it, letting it sit on her kitchen table like a bomb she didn't know how to defuse. Temperance asked about it twice, her bright green eyes curious about the fancy paper, and Demi deflected with lies that tasted bitter on her tongue. When she finally opened it, the language was careful and legally precise, dancing around direct accusations while making the intention crystal clear. Gareth Foster was requesting voluntary paternity testing to establish biological relationship to Temperance Lily Adams. If Demi agreed to testing and results proved paternity, he proposed they work out a private arrangement regarding his involvement in the child's life. If she refused, he would file a formal petition with the court seeking to establish paternity through legal channels and request visitation rights accordingly. The words blurred as Demi read them a second time, then a third. She'd known this was coming from the moment he'd confronted her outside the school, but seeing it formalized in legal language made it real in a way that stole her breath. He was going to force his way into their lives whether she wanted it or not, and the law would probably help him do it, because biology apparently mattered more than the fact that he'd thrown them away without knowing they existed. Sleep became impossible. She lay awake, listening to Temperance breathe in the next room, planning escape routes that made no logical sense. They could move across the country, change their names, disappear before he filed anything official. But she knew that was insane, that running would only make things worse, that she couldn't spend the rest of their lives hiding from a man who had every legal right to know his biological child. The knowledge made her want to scream, to rage against the unfairness of a system that gave rights to someone who'd done nothing to earn them. Temperance started having nightmares. She'd wake up crying about losing her mother, about being alone, about monsters she couldn't describe. Demi would hold her through these night terrors, stroking her hair and whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Her daughter was picking up on the anxiety radiating from her, sensing something wrong, even if she couldn't articulate what. The guilt was excruciating. Demi had wanted to protect Temperance from pain, but her own fear was hurting her daughter anyway. "Mama, why are you sad?" Temperance asked one morning over cereal, her small face serious in a way that broke Demi's heart. "I'm not sad, baby. Just tired from work." "You're sad," Temperance insisted with the brutal honesty of childhood. "You cry at night." "I hear you." Demi pulled her daughter into her lap, breathing in the clean scent of her shampoo, trying to find words that wouldn't add to her nightmares. "Sometimes grown-ups have complicated feelings about complicated things. But I promise you're safe and I love you, and nothing is going to change that. You believe me?" Temperance nodded, but her eyes remained worried, too perceptive for her own good. Demi wondered what other damage she was doing in her attempt to protect her daughter from Gareth's reappearance. Maybe the protection itself was becoming the problem. She made an appointment with a family lawyer recommended by a colleague. Spent money she didn't want to spend on consultation that might tell her things she didn't want to hear. The lawyer's office was professional and warm, designed to put clients at ease. But Demi felt nothing but dread as she explained her situation to a woman who took notes with practiced efficiency. "The reality is that if he establishes paternity, he will likely be granted some form of visitation rights," the lawyer said gently. "Courts generally believe that children benefit from knowing both biological parents unless there's evidence of abuse or neglect. His abandonment of you doesn't count as abandonment of the child, since he didn't know she existed. So he gets to force his way into her life because he contributed DNA? That's what matters?" Demi heard the bitterness in her own voice and didn't care. "I understand your frustration, and I'm not saying it's fair. I'm saying it's likely how a court would rule. However, you do have control over how this happens. If you fight him entirely, refuse testing, make this adversarial, it will drag out and be expensive and traumatic for everyone, especially Temperance. If you agree to testing, but set strict conditions for contact, you maintain some control over the process." "What kind of conditions?" The lawyer outlined possibilities. Supervised visitation only, gradual introduction facilitated by a child psychologist, completion of parenting classes, requirements for consistency and reliability. Demi listened and felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling. She couldn't win this fight by refusing to engage. She could only manage the damage by controlling the terms. "I need to think about it," she said, gathering her purse with hands that wouldn't quite steady. "I understand. But the longer you wait, the more likely he is to file formally. If that happens, you lose the advantage of setting the initial terms." Demi drove home on autopilot, her mind spinning through impossible scenarios. Every choice felt like surrender. Agree to testing, and she was admitting Gareth had rights to her daughter. Refuse and he'd file anyway, making her look uncooperative to a judge who would decide Temperance's fate based on legal precedent, instead of understanding what Gareth was actually capable of destroying. That night, after putting Temperance to bed with extra hugs and reassurances, Demi sat at her kitchen table with the lawyer's letter and a pen. She wrote her response through 3 drafts before finding words that felt right, that didn't reveal how terrified she was of letting Gareth near the most precious thing in her world. She agreed to paternity testing, but outlined conditions so strict they felt like armor. Supervised visitation only, with periodic review by a child psychologist. Gareth must complete parenting classes for absent fathers and undergo therapy to address his documented pattern of abandoning people when they became inconvenient. Any introduction to Temperance must be done gradually with professional facilitation, prioritizing the child's emotional well-being above all else. Demi would retain full legal custody with him as a visitor only, and she reserved the right to terminate contact if his involvement proved harmful to Temperance in any way. She sent the response through her own lawyer, formal and cold, giving him no room to negotiate beyond accepting her terms or facing a court battle that would expose every cruel thing he'd done. Then she waited for his response, while time seemed to slow to an agonizing crawl. The answer came within 2 days. He agreed to everything. Every condition, every requirement, every limitation she'd imposed. His lawyer's response was brief and professional, but underneath the legal language she could sense desperation. He wanted to know his daughter badly enough to accept whatever restrictions Demi demanded, and that scared her almost as much as if he'd fought back. He agreed, she told her lawyer over the phone, feeling like she'd just signed away something fundamental. "That's good news. Demi, it means you control how this unfolds. You set the pace, the boundaries, everything. He has to earn his way into Temperance's life one small step at a time." But it didn't feel like good news. It felt like inevitability, like watching a storm approach, knowing there was no shelter strong enough to hide in. She'd spent years building a fortress around herself and Temperance, and now she was opening the gate to let in the enemy because the law said he had rights, and fighting would only hurt her daughter more. That evening, Demi sat Temperance down in the living room with gentle hands and a racing heart. She'd been rehearsing this conversation in her head for days, trying to find words that would explain the unexplainable to a child who deserved simplicity instead of adult complications. "Baby, I need to talk to you about something important." She pulled Temperance into her lap, needing the physical contact for her own comfort as much as her daughter's. "You know how you've been asking about your daddy?" Temperance's green eyes went wide and serious. "Is he dead?" "No, sweetheart. He's alive. He just hasn't been part of our lives because of grown-up reasons that are complicated. But he found out about you, and he wants to meet you. He wants to meet me." The wonder in Temperance's voice was a knife between Demi's ribs. "Really?" "Really. But we're going to go very slowly, okay? You're going to meet him with a special doctor there who helps families, and if it feels scary or bad, you can stop any time. Your feelings matter most. Do you understand?" Temperance nodded, her small face a mixture of excitement and confusion. "What's he like? Is he nice? How did you answer that, honestly? Yes, he can be charming when it serves him, but he's also capable of destroying someone in front of a room full of people just to prove he's moved past them. Demi settled for something simpler and more painful. I don't know what he's like now. People can change. We'll find out together. That night, long after Temperance had fallen asleep with her head full of questions about the father she'd never known, Demi stood in the doorway of her daughter's room and let silent tears track down her face. She'd kept Temperance safe for so long, protected her from the knowledge that her father had discarded them before she was born, shielded her from rejection and disappointment. Now she was deliberately opening that door, letting in someone who'd proven himself capable of casual cruelty, and all she could do was pray that he'd somehow become someone different. Someone worthy of the perfect child who carried his eyes and his stubborn chin and none of his capacity for destruction. But prayer felt inadequate against the storm she could feel building, threatening to sweep away everything she'd built from the ashes of his devastation. Chapter 7. The Father Who Must Prove Himself. The parenting class met in a community center that smelled like coffee and industrial cleaning solution, with folding chairs arranged in a circle like some kind of 12-step program for fathers who'd failed. Gareth sat among men whose stories were uniformly ugly, tales of addiction and abandonment, and choices that had severed them from their children. He listened to a father who'd missed birthdays because of prison, another who'd walked away when his girlfriend got pregnant because he was too scared to handle responsibility, a third who'd chosen his career over custody and was now fighting to rebuild what he'd broken. The facilitator, a woman with kind eyes and zero tolerance for excuses, asked each man why he was there. When Gareth's turn came, he tried to find words that didn't sound pathetic. I didn't know my daughter existed until recently. Her mother kept the pregnancy from me because I'd ended our relationship badly. Very badly. He paused, aware of how inadequate this summary was. I humiliated her in public, told her she wasn't good enough for my life, and left her to deal with everything alone. She raised our daughter for years while I was off living my life completely unaware. Now I'm trying to earn the right to meet her. Did you physically abuse the mother? The facilitator asked directly. No, nothing like that. Just emotional cruelty. Cruelty is cruelty, another father said quietly. Doesn't matter if you hit someone or just make them feel worthless. The damage is the same. The words settled over Gareth like a weight he couldn't shift. He'd been telling himself his actions were forgivable because he hadn't been violent, hadn't known about the pregnancy, hadn't intended the worst consequences. But intention didn't erase impact. He'd destroyed someone deliberately, and that person had been carrying his child while he was doing it. The classes covered basics he should have already known, skills that should have been instinctive but apparently weren't. How to talk to a child at their eye level, how to listen without judgment, how to build trust gradually instead of demanding immediate affection, how to put a child's emotional needs before your own desire for connection. Each lesson felt like indictment of everything Gareth had done wrong, every way he'd proven himself unfit for the title of father. Therapy was worse because it required excavating truths he'd been avoiding most of his life. His therapist, a man named Dr. Hammond, who had a talent for asking questions that hurt, wanted to understand why Gareth had destroyed Demi so thoroughly, instead of just ending the relationship with basic decency. I was terrified, Gareth admitted during their third session, the words tasting like confession. I grew up poor, watching my parents struggle, always feeling like we were one disaster away from losing everything. When I started succeeding, when money stopped being this constant source of panic, I became obsessed with never going back to that. Demi represented where I came from. Loving her meant acknowledging that part of myself, and I wanted to erase it. So you erased her instead, Dr. Hammond said without judgment, just observation. I told myself I was being honest, that she deserved someone who really loved her, not someone who was embarrassed by her. But the truth is, I was punishing her for making me feel things I didn't want to feel. Guilt about moving past the life we'd built together, Shame that I cared more about appearances than substance. I made her the villain in my story, so I could be the victim. Someone forced to make hard choices, instead of someone making selfish ones. The admission sat heavy in the room between them. Dr. Hammond leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. And now you want to be her daughter's father. Why? Is this about the child or about absolving yourself of guilt? Gareth opened his mouth to insist it was about Temperance, only about her, but the therapist's raised eyebrow stopped him. I don't know, he said finally. Maybe both. I missed everything, her birth, her first words, years of her life that I can never get back. Part of me wants to know her because she's my daughter, and I love the idea of her even though we've never met. But part of me wants this, because having a relationship with her would mean Demi has to forgive me at least enough to coexist, and that would make me feel less like a monster. You understand, that's not healthy motivation for pursuing a relationship with a child. I understand nothing I want matters here. The only thing that matters is what's best for Temperance. If me being in her life hurts her more than helps her, I should stay away, regardless of what I want. I'm trying to figure out if I'm capable of that kind of selflessness, or if I'm still the same selfish bastard who destroyed her mother. Dr. Hammond made notes in his leather journal before responding. The fact that you're asking that question is progress. The man Demi knew wouldn't have questioned his motivations. He would have assumed his presence was automatically beneficial because it served his needs. You're starting to understand that intent doesn't matter as much as impact, and that's the foundation of actual change. The sessions continued twice weekly, each one peeling back layers Gareth had spent years building over his own ugliness. They discussed his relationship with his parents, the poverty that had shaped his fear-based decision-making, the moment he decided that being successful meant abandoning everything that reminded him of struggle. They examined his marriage to Hadley, how he'd chosen status over authenticity and paid for it with years of emptiness. They explored what it meant to be a father, not just biologically but functionally, and whether Gareth was capable of putting someone else's needs before his own, consistently enough to deserve the title. Your daughter doesn't need another person in her life, Dr. Hammond said bluntly during one session. She has a mother who loves her completely, who's provided everything she needs. You being present won't fill any gap because there is no gap. You're asking to be added to her life, not to complete something missing. That means you have to bring value, not just demand space because you share DNA. What kind of value could I possibly bring? Gareth asked, genuinely confused. I've been absent her entire life. I'm a stranger who happens to be biologically connected to her. That's what you need to figure out before you meet her. What can you offer this child that she doesn't already have? And is it enough to justify the disruption your presence will cause? Gareth spent nights at his hotel working through those questions. What could he offer Temperance? Another person who loved her, but Demi's love was already complete and unconditional. Financial support, but Demi had built a career that provided stability. A father figure. But what did he know about being a father when he'd spent his life proving he couldn't maintain relationships that required actual sacrifice? Maybe the only thing he could offer was honesty. Honesty about who he was, including the ugly parts. Honesty about why he hadn't been there, not making excuses, but acknowledging his failures. Honesty about his hope that he could be better than he'd been, while admitting he might fail at that too. Children deserved truth even when it was complicated, and maybe especially when it was complicated. He practiced introducing himself to a daughter he'd never met, standing in front of his hotel mirror, trying different approaches. None of them felt adequate. How did you tell a child you were her father when you'd been absent for every significant moment of her life? How did you explain that absence in ways that didn't make her feel unwanted or make her mother look like the villain? The balance felt impossible, but he kept trying because giving up would prove Demi right about everything. The paternity test results came back with certainty that would hold up in any legal challenge. Temperance Lily Adams was his biological daughter, sharing markers that confirmed relationship beyond any doubt. Gareth held the paperwork and felt joy mixed with grief so profound it took his breath away. He had a daughter, and he'd missed everything that mattered. First steps, first words, every birthday and holiday and ordinary Tuesday that added up to a childhood he'd never get back. Demi's lawyer contacted his with the schedule for supervised visits. They would start with one session in a family therapy office, with a child psychologist present to facilitate introduction and monitor Temperance's reactions. If that went well, they'd gradually increase frequency and duration of visits. If it went poorly, they'd reassess whether continued contact served Temperance's interests. Everything was structured around the child's well-being, which was exactly how it should be, but still made Gareth feel like he was constantly on trial. The night before the first scheduled meeting, Gareth couldn't sleep. He lay in his hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, imagining every way the encounter could go wrong. What if Temperance hated him on sight? What if she asked questions he couldn't answer without making Demi look bad? What if his presence scared her or hurt her or confirmed everything Demi believed about his capacity for damage? He called Dr. Hammond at midnight, knowing his therapist would be annoyed but desperate for guidance. "You can't control how she reacts," Dr. Hammond said, his voice gravelly with sleep. "You can only control how you show up. Be honest, be present, and be prepared for her to not want anything to do with you. Children are perceptive. They know when adults are performing versus when they're genuine. Your job isn't to make her like you immediately. Your job is to show up consistently and let her decide over time whether you're someone she wants in her life." What if I mess this up? You probably will. Every parent messes up. The question is whether you'll keep showing up after you mess up or whether you'll do what you did with Demi and run when things get hard. Gareth ended the call and sat in darkness thinking about that distinction. Running had been his pattern, abandoning things when they required more than he wanted to give. He'd run from poverty, from relationships that demanded vulnerability, from anything that made him feel inadequate. But you couldn't run from being a father, not if you actually wanted to be one. The role required staying, even when it was uncomfortable, showing up even when you didn't know what to say, proving through repeated action that you were reliable. Tomorrow he would meet his daughter for the first time. She would look at him with Demi's wariness and his own eyes, and he would have to find some way to explain why he hadn't been there, why he wanted to be there now, and why she should trust him when everyone in her life had probably warned her not to. The odds of success felt impossible, but he'd agreed to try anyway because the alternative was spending the rest of his life knowing his daughter existed and chose nothing to do with him. At least this way, he'd know he tried, even if trying ended in failure that confirmed every terrible thing Demi believed about him. Chapter 8. The Meeting That Breaks Them All. The family therapy office tried too hard to be welcoming, with soft lighting and comfortable furniture arranged to minimize the clinical feel. Toys sat organized in bins along one wall, chosen specifically to appeal to different developmental stages, and the walls displayed art that was calming without being infantilizing. Dr. Reeves, the child psychologist facilitating this meeting, greeted Gareth with a handshake that assessed him in ways he couldn't quite identify. "Remember what we discussed," she said quietly. "Let Temperance set the pace. Answer her questions honestly, but age appropriately. Don't make promises you can't keep. Most importantly, understand this first meeting is about her comfort, not your redemption." Gareth nodded, his throat too tight for words. He'd been awake since dawn, had changed clothes 3 times trying to find something that looked approachable without trying too hard. And now he sat in a chair that felt simultaneously too soft and too rigid, waiting to meet the daughter he'd missed years of knowing. When the door opened and Demi walked in holding Temperance's hand, time seemed to stutter and reform wrong. His daughter was smaller than he'd imagined, more delicate somehow, with dark curls pulled into two puffs and green eyes that were exactly like looking in a mirror. She wore a yellow dress with flowers embroidered on the hem, and she clung to Demi's leg with the particular fear of children facing something unknown and potentially threatening. Gareth stood too quickly, then sat back down when Temperance flinched. He'd already messed up, and they hadn't even started. Dr. Reeves gestured for Demi and Temperance to sit on the couch opposite him, creating physical distance that felt both necessary and insurmountable. "Temperance, this is Gareth," Demi said quietly, her voice carefully neutral. "He's the person we talked about, the one who wanted to meet you." "Hi," Gareth managed, and his voice came out rougher than intended. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Hi, Temperance. It's really nice to meet you." Temperance didn't respond, just pressed closer to Demi while studying him with an intensity that made him want to look away. Children saw things adults tried to hide, and he wondered what she was seeing in him, what judgments she was already forming. "You can call me Gareth," he continued when silence stretched too long, "or anything you're comfortable with. Whatever feels right to you. Are you my daddy?" The question came out small but direct, cutting through pretense to the heart of everything. Gareth looked at Demi, unsure how to answer, but she gave him nothing. This was his to navigate. "I am," he said finally, "biologically, but I haven't been part of your life, haven't been there for you, so I understand if that word doesn't feel right yet." "Where were you?" No anger in the question, just confusion that was somehow worse. "I didn't know you existed, sweetheart. Your mum didn't tell me about you because—" He faltered, unsure how much truth was appropriate for a child this young. "Because he left before I knew you were coming," Demi interjected, her tone sharp. "He ended our relationship and moved on with his life. When I found out I was pregnant, I decided we didn't need him." The words landed exactly as she'd intended them, making Gareth the villain without actually lying. He wanted to argue, to explain that he hadn't known, but Dr. Reeves shot him a warning look. They discussed this in preparation, how he couldn't make Temperance choose between parents, couldn't undermine Demi's credibility, even when her framing hurt him. "That's true," he said carefully. "I left your mom, and I hurt her badly. She had every reason not to tell me about you. I wasn't someone who deserved to be your father back then. Did you not want me?" Temperance's voice wavered slightly, and Gareth's heart cracked clean through. "I didn't know about you to want you or not want you, but I promise, if I'd known, I would have." He stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence honestly. "You would have what?" Demi's voice cut through his hesitation like a blade. "Stayed out of obligation, resented us for ruining your perfect new life. Don't make promises to her that we both know you wouldn't have kept." "Demi," Dr. Reeves said gently, but the damage was done. Temperance started crying, quiet tears that she tried to hide against Demi's shoulder. Gareth felt panic rise in his chest, the meeting falling apart before it had really begun. "I'm sorry," he said desperately. "Please don't cry. I didn't mean to make you sad." "Why is everyone fighting?" Temperance asked through tears. "I just wanted to know my daddy, but everyone's mad." "We're not mad at you, baby," Demi said, shooting Gareth a look of pure fury. "Nobody is mad at you. But you're mad at him." Temperance pulled back to look at her mother. "You're mad at my daddy." "That's between us, not about you," Demi tried to explain, but Temperance was shaking her head. "He left you because of me. He didn't want me, so he left." "No, sweetheart, no," Gareth tried to interrupt, but Temperance wasn't listening to either of them anymore, just crying in that heartbroken way children cry when they're trying to understand something too complicated for their experience. Dr. Reeves stood smoothly, her professional calm cutting through the emotional chaos. I think we need to take a break. Demi, why don't you take Temperance to get some water from the cooler in the hall? We'll regroup in a few minutes. Demi didn't argue, just gathered their daughter and carried her out of the room, leaving Gareth alone with Dr. Reeves and the wreckage of his first attempt at fatherhood. That was a disaster, he said, dropping his head into his hands. It was difficult, Dr. Reeves corrected, but not unexpected. First meetings with estranged parents are almost always hard. Temperance is trying to process a lot of complicated emotions, and neither you nor Demi managed to keep your adult conflict out of the conversation. She hates me. The realization felt like drowning. My daughter hates me, and we just met. She doesn't hate you. She's confused and overwhelmed. But you need to understand something, Gareth. This isn't about you earning forgiveness or redemption. This is about whether you can consistently show up for a child who doesn't know you and has no reason to trust you. That first interaction was painful, and there will be more painful ones. The question is whether you're going to keep coming back, or whether this is where you decide it's too hard. Through the wall, he could hear Temperance still crying, hear Demi's low voice trying to comfort her. He'd been in his daughter's presence for less than 10 minutes, and he'd already hurt her. Already proven himself capable of causing exactly the kind of pain Demi had spent years protecting her from. Should I go? He asked. Would it be better for her if I just left? That's not my decision to make. That's yours. But understand that if you leave now, you're confirming everything your daughter just learned about you. That you're someone who runs when things get hard. Gareth sat with that knowledge, feeling like it might crush him. He could walk away, tell himself this was proof he didn't belong in Temperance's life, go back to his hotel and his empty existence. Or he could stay, could face his daughter's tears and his ex's fury and his own overwhelming inadequacy, and try again, despite knowing he'd probably mess up repeatedly. When Demi and Temperance came back 10 minutes later, Temperance's eyes were red, but she'd stopped crying. She climbed back onto the couch next to her mother, but she was looking at Gareth with something that might have been curiosity instead of just fear. I'm sorry I made you upset, Gareth said quietly. I don't want to hurt you. I know I already did just by being here and bringing up confusing stuff, but I promise that wasn't my intention. Why do you want to know me? Temperance asked, her voice steadier now. If you didn't know about me before, why do you care now? The question deserved honesty, even if honesty was inadequate. Because when I found out you existed, when I realized I had a daughter I'd never met, it changed everything. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, and leaving your mom the way I did was the biggest one. I can't fix that. I can't make up for the years I wasn't here. But I want to try to be someone you can know, someone who shows up for you if you'll let me. Are you going to leave again? The question was devastating in its simplicity. I'm going to try my best not to. But I understand if you don't believe me, because I haven't given you any reason to trust me yet. All I can do is keep showing up and hope that eventually you'll see I mean it. Temperance studied him for a long moment, then reached for a coloring book Dr. Reeves had placed on the coffee table. Do you know how to color? The shift was so sudden, it took Gareth a moment to process. I think so. It's been a while. Okay. She pushed the book toward him along with a box of crayons. You can color with me. But you have to stay in the lines. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even really acceptance. But it was a small bridge offered by a child who was braver than any adult in the room, and Gareth took it with trembling hands. They colored together in silence for the remaining minutes of the session, Temperance explaining which colors she thought worked best for different pictures, occasionally correcting his technique with the serious authority of someone who knew what they were doing. When time was up and Demi gathered their things to leave, Temperance looked back at Gareth from the doorway. Will you come back? If you want me to, I'll come back every time your mom says it's okay. Okay. She thought about it for a moment. You can come back, but you have to practice coloring. You're not very good at it yet. After they left, Gareth sat alone in the therapy office with Dr. Reeves, staring at the coloring book with its slightly messy pages that represented the only connection he'd managed to build with his daughter. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to keep showing up when it's this hard." "Then you figure out how to become strong enough," Dr. Reeves said without sympathy. "Because that little girl just showed you more grace than you probably deserved, and you owe it to her to at least try. Nobody said earning your daughter's trust would be easy. They said it would be worth it. The question is whether you believe that enough to do the work." Gareth left the office as the sun was setting, exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. He'd met his daughter, spoken to her, colored with her, and learned that being a father meant sitting with your own inadequacy while a child decided whether you were worth knowing. The road ahead looked impossibly long, but for the first time he understood that the destination wasn't forgiveness or redemption. It was just showing up repeatedly until eventually, maybe, Temperance felt safe enough to let him be part of her life in whatever small ways she needed. Chapter 9. The Slow Rebuild of Broken Things. The second visit went slightly better than the first, though better was relative when measured against disaster. Temperance didn't cry, which felt like victory. She brought her own coloring supplies this time, spreading them across the coffee table with the proprietary air of someone claiming territory. Gareth followed her lead, coloring what she told him to color, using colors she approved, learning that being her father meant surrendering, control, and letting her dictate the terms of their relationship. "You're getting better," she announced after examining his work on a picture of a butterfly. "But you still go outside the lines sometimes." "I'll keep practicing," he promised, and meant it in ways that had nothing to do with coloring. Demi sat on the opposite couch, watchful and tense, ready to intervene if he said the wrong thing or pushed too hard. Her presence was both necessary and painful, a constant reminder that he was on probation in his own daughter's life. Dr. Reeves observed their interactions with professional detachment, occasionally redirecting conversation when it veered toward dangerous territory. The visits continued weekly, each one building on the last in ways that felt both significant and impossibly slow. Temperance started asking Gareth questions about himself, small inquiries that revealed curiosity beneath her wariness. What was his favorite color? Did he like the same foods she did? Had he ever been to the ocean? He answered honestly, resisting the urge to make himself seem more interesting, letting her see him as he actually was. During their fifth visit, she brought a drawing she'd made at school, a stick figure family with careful labels. "That's Mama," she explained, pointing to a figure with brown skin and curly hair. "That's me. And that's you." The third figure stood slightly apart from the others, but it was there, included. Gareth's eyes burned with tears he barely managed to contain. "Can I keep this?" he asked, his voice rough. Temperance considered the request seriously. "I guess so, but you have to keep it safe. Don't let it get ripped or anything, I promise. I'll keep it somewhere special." He framed the drawing and kept it on the nightstand in his hotel room, where it was the last thing he saw before sleeping and the first thing he saw upon waking. This piece of paper with its clumsy stick figures became evidence that he existed in his daughter's world, even if only at the margins. The breakthrough came during a visit in early spring. Temperance had been telling him about a conflict at school, how a friend had said something mean and she didn't know how to respond. Gareth listened without trying to immediately fix the problem, letting her work through her feelings at her own pace. "Sometimes people hurt you on purpose," she said, her green eyes serious, "like they want you to feel bad." "Yeah, that happens sometimes." He thought about his own capacity for deliberate cruelty. "And sometimes people hurt you without meaning to, but it still hurts just the same." "Did you mean to hurt my mama?" The question came without warning, direct as only children could be. Gareth glanced at Demi, who'd gone very still, and then back at his daughter. "I did mean to hurt her," he said finally. "I was angry at myself and scared about things that didn't actually matter, and I took those feelings out on your mom. I said terrible things to her in front of other people, made her feel small and worthless, and I did it on purpose because I thought it would make me feel bigger. But it just made me cruel. And that's why she didn't tell you about me. That's why. She was protecting you from someone who'd proven he wasn't safe. She was being a good mom. Are you safe now? Temperance asked, and the question held weight beyond her years. I'm trying to be. I'm working really hard to be better than I was. But your mom is right to make sure, to go slowly, to keep you protected until she knows for certain. That's what good parents do. Temperance absorbed this in silence, then went back to her coloring like they'd been discussing something ordinary. But something had shifted. She'd asked the hard question and gotten an honest answer, and while that didn't erase the past, it laid foundation for building something forward. Demi cornered him in the parking lot after that session, her expression unreadable. What you said in there about hurting me on purpose, you didn't have to admit that. Yes, I did. She deserves honesty, even when it makes me look bad. Especially when it makes me look bad. You're different than you were. I don't know if it's real or just performance, but you're saying things the old Gareth never would have. People can change, he said quietly. Not always, and not easily, but sometimes the consequences of who we were become unbearable enough that we have to try being someone else. She didn't respond, just walked back to her car where Temperance waited. But he saw something in her expression that might have been the first crack in her armor. The visits stretched through spring into summer. Temperance grew more comfortable, stopped positioning herself quite so close to Demi, started engaging with Gareth directly. They graduated from coloring to simple games, from supervised therapy sessions to monitored visits in public parks. During one park visit, she fell and scraped her knee badly enough to draw blood and tears. Gareth moved instinctively, kneeling beside her with his hands hovering, wanting to comfort but unsure if he was allowed. Temperance made the choice for him, throwing her arms around his neck and crying into his shoulder. Demi pulled antiseptic and bandages from her bag, but she let Gareth hold their daughter through the initial shock of pain. You're okay, he told her gently. It's just a scrape. It hurts now, but you're going to be fine. It stings, she sobbed against his shirt. I know, sweetheart, but we'll clean it up and put a bandage on it. And in a few days, you won't even remember it happened. After Demi had tended the wound and Temperance had calmed down, she looked at Gareth with something new in her expression. You called me sweetheart. He hadn't even realized. The endearment had slipped out naturally. Is that okay? I can call you something else if you don't like it. No, it's okay. She tested the word on her tongue. Mama calls me baby and sweetheart. You can too, I guess, since you're my daddy. The casual way she claimed him, like it was a fact rather than a question, made his chest tight. He looked at Demi and saw her own complicated emotions playing across her face. Pride that Temperance was handling this with grace. Fear that she was opening herself up to someone who might hurt her. Resignation that whether she liked it or not, Gareth was becoming part of their lives in ways that couldn't be easily undone. As summer deepened, the visits increased to twice weekly. Temperance started asking when she could see him between scheduled sessions, started talking about him to her friends at school, started including him in her mental map of family. It wasn't complete acceptance, and it certainly wasn't forgiveness of his past, but it was something, a small, fragile connection built from consistent showing up and honest conversations and coloring inside the lines of the boundaries Demi had set. Dr. Reeves pulled Gareth aside after one session, her expression more approving than he'd seen before. You're doing well. Better than most fathers in your situation manage. You're patient, you're honest, and you're prioritizing Temperance's comfort over your own needs. Keep doing that. But Gareth knew working wasn't the same as finished. He'd earned his daughter's cautious affection, had proven he could show up consistently, but he hadn't earned Demi's forgiveness and might never earn it. Every visit still happened under her watchful eye. Every interaction was still monitored and assessed, and he remained a visitor in his daughter's life rather than an integrated part of it. Chapter 10. The long road to something like family. More than a year passed in increments of supervised visits that gradually became unsupervised hours. Then entire afternoons, then occasional overnights in the small apartment Gareth had rented. He'd furnished it carefully with Temperance's input, letting her choose paint colors for the bedroom that would be hers, selecting furniture together, making sure she understood this was her space too. The transformation happened so gradually that Demi almost missed it. The way Temperance stopped needing reassurance before visits with her father, stopped coming home and immediately checking that Demi was still there, stopped asking questions about whether he was going to disappear again. The fear had been replaced with something cautious but real. They celebrated Temperance's birthday together at a park she'd chosen, with friends from school running wild across playground equipment, while Demi and Gareth managed logistics from opposite ends of a picnic table. They worked in careful coordination, passing each other plates and napkins and juice boxes with the efficiency of people who'd learned to navigate shared space without collision. "She's happy," Gareth said quietly, his eyes following their daughter around the playground. "You did that. You raised someone joyful and confident and kind, all by yourself. That's remarkable, Demi." The compliment landed strangely, both genuine and painful. "I did it because I had to, because you weren't there. I know. And I'm grateful you were strong enough to do it alone, even though you shouldn't have had to be." This was their dynamic now, built from honesty that didn't soften the edges of past damage, but at least acknowledged its existence. They weren't friends, and might never be, but they'd learned to function as co-parents. The party wound down as late afternoons stretched toward evening. Parents collected their children, thanking Demi and Gareth with the assumption that they were a couple, or at least cordial exes. When finally only the three of them remained, surrounded by gift-wrapped debris and leftover cake, Temperance flopped onto the grass between them with dramatic exhaustion. "This was the best birthday ever," she announced to the sky. "Because you were both here, both my parents together." Demi and Gareth exchanged glances over their daughter's prone form. Neither knew how to respond to the naked hope in her voice. "We're here because we both love you," Demi said carefully. "That doesn't mean we're together as a couple, baby. You understand that, right?" "I know." Temperance sat up, grass stuck in her curls. "But you don't fight anymore. You talk nice to each other. That's good enough." The simplicity of her standards broke something in Demi's chest. Her daughter didn't need them to love each other or even to be friends. She just needed them to be civil, to coexist peacefully, to show her that adults could navigate conflict without destroying each other. Later, after Temperance had fallen asleep in the car on the drive home, Demi carried her to bed and stood in the doorway watching her daughter sleep. This perfect human who'd been raised without a father was learning what it meant to have two parents who showed up, even if showing up looked different than traditional family structures suggested it should. Her phone buzzed with a text from Gareth. "Thank you for today, for letting me be part of her birthday, for trusting me with her. I know that's not easy." Demi stared at the message for a long time before responding. "You've earned it. Not forgiveness and probably not friendship, but trust that you'll keep showing up for her." "Don't make me regret that trust," his response came quickly. "I won't. I promise." Promises from him still felt fragile, but he'd been keeping them for over a year now. Maybe people could change. Maybe destruction wasn't permanent. Maybe broken things could be rebuilt into something functional, even if they never returned to their original form. 3 years later, Temperance stood in Gareth's apartment getting ready for her school's father-daughter dance. A ritual she'd watched her classmates participate in for years while pretending it didn't matter. At nearly 9 years old, she was losing the rounded softness of early childhood, growing into features that would someday make strangers do double takes at her resemblance to him. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice catching slightly as she twirled in the pale purple dress Demi had helped her choose. Do you think Mama will take pictures before we go? I know she will. She's probably got the camera ready already. They drove to Demi's house together. Gareth had a key now, used for pickups and drop-offs, for emergencies, and occasionally for dinners where all three of them sat around Demi's kitchen table. They weren't a traditional family, would never be, but they'd found a rhythm that worked. Demi was indeed waiting with her camera, and her expression when she saw Temperance made Gareth's chest tight. She looked at their daughter with such fierce love it was almost painful to witness. "My beautiful girl," Demi said, pulling Temperance into a careful hug. "You're growing up too fast." The photo session happened on Demi's front porch. Gareth and Temperance together, making silly faces and serious ones. Temperance alone, looking far too mature for her age. And then, unexpectedly, Demi handed the camera to a neighbor. "All three of us," she said. And the words landed with significance, none of them acknowledged aloud. They stood together on the porch, Temperance in the middle with her parents flanking her, and smiled for a camera that captured something both ordinary and remarkable. A family that didn't fit any traditional definition, but existed nonetheless. At the school gymnasium, Temperance pulled Gareth onto the dance floor with determination. They moved through simple dances, surrounded by other fathers and daughters, all of them writing memories that would last long after the music stopped. "Thank you for coming," Temperance said during a slower song. "Some of my friends don't have dads who show up for stuff like this. I'm glad you're not like that." The words hit him harder than she probably intended. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be. Do you think you and Mama will ever be friends? Like real friends, not just people who are nice to each other because of me?" Gareth considered lying or deflecting, but they'd built their relationship on honesty. "I don't know. What your mom and I had before you were born, I broke that really badly. Some things can't be completely fixed, just learn to work around. But we care about each other in a different way now, because we both love you." "That's kind of like friends," Temperance reasoned. "Just complicated friends." When he dropped Temperance back at Demi's house later that evening, instead of the quick exchange that usually happened, Demi invited him in for coffee. It was the first time she'd done that, without some logistical reason requiring discussion, just an offer that suggested she was open to conversation beyond the necessary. They sat at her kitchen table, while Temperance showed them both the small trophy she'd received, chattering about which of her friends had been there and what songs they'd played. Then she went to get ready for bed, leaving Demi and Gareth in that familiar space of adults navigating silence after a child's energy has left the room. "She had a good time," Demi said finally. "Thank you for taking her. It meant a lot to her. It meant a lot to me, too. I still can't quite believe she wants me there for things like that. You've earned it. I didn't think you would. I thought you'd show up for a few months, get bored or frustrated, and disappear again. I was wrong about that. I almost did quit. After that first meeting when she cried, I sat in my car, convinced I was only making things worse. But I couldn't do that to Temperance. Or to you, honestly. You'd spent years raising her alone because I'd proven I was unreliable. I needed to prove you wrong. You did prove me wrong. Not about the past, you can't change that. But about who you are now." She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, not looking at him. "I don't forgive you for what you did to me. I don't know if I ever will, but I respect what you've become, and I'm grateful Temperance has you in her life. That's more than I deserve, and more than I hoped for when this started." They sat in silence that felt comfortable instead of awkward, both of them aware this conversation represented something shifting. Not romance, never that, but perhaps the beginning of actual friendship built on foundation that had nothing to do with their past. Temperance appeared in the doorway in her pajamas. "Are you guys okay? You look weird." "We're fine, baby," Demi assured her. "Just talking about what a good time you had tonight." "It was the best," Temperance confirmed. "Will you come to my school concert next month? We're doing songs from different countries, and I have a solo." "I'll be there," Gareth promised. "Front row if your mom can get tickets. We'll both be there," Demi said. and the we felt significant in ways that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with partnership. After Gareth left, Demi stood in her kitchen thinking about the strange journey that had brought them here. From the night he'd destroyed her in front of strangers to tonight, sitting at her table drinking coffee like almost friends. They'd traveled distance that shouldn't have been navigable. They would never have what they'd lost, would never reclaim the relationship that existed before he'd called her manipulative and walked away. But they had something different now, built from the wreckage of that destruction. A functional partnership, mutual respect, shared love for a daughter who deserved parents capable of putting her needs first. In his apartment, Gareth looked at the framed drawing Temperance had made years ago, the stick figures that had slowly become reality. He'd earned his daughter's love through patience and consistency. He'd earned Demi's grudging respect by proving he could prioritize their child over his own comfort. He hadn't earned forgiveness and knew he never would. But maybe that was okay. Maybe some wounds were too deep to fully heal, and the best you could do was learn to function despite the scars. His daughter had both parents now, imperfect and complicated but present. She had love that came without conditions, security that wasn't dependent on any relationship beyond the one she had with each of them individually. The next morning, Demi's phone rang early. Gareth's name on the screen still made her pause before answering. "Temperance left her backpack in my car," he said. "I can drop it off before school if that helps." "That would be great, actually. We're running late this morning." When he arrived 20 minutes later, Temperance threw her arms around him in greeting like it was the most natural thing in the world. Demi watched her daughter hug her father and felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not forgiveness, that was too far, but something softer than the anger she'd carried for so long. "Thank you," she said as he handed over the backpack. "Any time." He hesitated at the door. "Demi, I know I can't fix what I broke between us, but I want you to know that seeing who you've become, understanding what you built from nothing while I was wasting time on things that didn't matter, it's made me realize you were always the strongest person I ever met. I was a coward for not recognizing that." The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw. Demi looked at the man who'd once destroyed her and saw someone different. Someone humbled by consequence, changed by the work of earning his daughter's trust, capable of acknowledging his failures without making excuses. "We should get going," she said finally, but her voice was gentler than it had been. "Come on, Temperance. Say goodbye to your dad." Temperance hugged him again, then skipped toward the car. Gareth stood on the porch watching them prepare to leave, and for the first time, Demi didn't feel the need to hurry away from his presence. "See you at the concert," she said. "See you then." As she drove Temperance to school, her daughter chattered about the upcoming performance, about how she was nervous but excited, about how it would be the first time both her parents watched her do something important on stage. Demi listened and realized that somehow, impossibly, they'd given their daughter what she'd always deserved. Not a traditional family, not the fairy tale version where everyone loved each other, but something real. Two parents who'd learned to work together to support her, to show up consistently, even when it was hard. The story didn't end with forgiveness or reconciliation. It ended with understanding, with two people who'd hurt each other, learning to build something functional from the pieces of what they'd broken. With a daughter who knew she was loved fiercely by both parents, even if they could never love each other the way they once had. Some wounds never fully healed. Some betrayals were too deep to forget, but people could learn to carry their scars with grace, could choose to build something new instead of remaining trapped in what was destroyed. Demi had spent years protecting her daughter from Gareth's capacity for cruelty, and somehow he'd become someone worth knowing. Not the man she'd loved, never that version again, but a father who showed up, who tried, who proved through years of patient effort that people could change if the stakes were high enough and they wanted it badly enough. That evening, after Temperance was asleep, Demi deleted the last remaining photos of her and Gareth from their relationship. Not out of anger anymore, but because those people didn't exist. She'd become someone stronger than the woman who'd been destroyed in that drawing room, and he'd become someone better than the man who'd chosen cruelty over kindness. They were different people now, connected by a daughter they both loved, learning to navigate a future neither had imagined. And that was enough. Not perfect, not what any of them would have chosen if they'd been offered better options, but enough. A family built from wreckage and determination and the fierce love of a child who'd learned to trust the father who'd been absent. They'd found their way to something sustainable, and the road ahead held possibility that none of them had expected to find. Sometimes the happy ending wasn't reconciliation. Sometimes it was simply learning to coexist with grace. And for Temperance, laughing in her sleep while both parents existed in her life with love and consistency, that was more than enough. It was everything. The end.